Dite countdown. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you once again for joining us on a brilliant afternoon. The weather is great. It's autumn, so winter, we suspect that winter is just around the corner, but we're not feeling it at all. It's lovely weather. We love talking about the weather because we've got an audience from all over the world, and we sort of brag about Harare weather. We do have a guest from Dubai. What do you think of our weather?
Well, I've felt for a long time that there are very few cities, maybe none, no cities, that have a weather like Harare. Harare is just amazing. I think April, May too is exceptional. They are the golden days for this city and maybe for this country. I mean, it's just beautiful out there. It's dry, grass is green, rivers are running, it's temperate, it's fantastic.
And Rufaro, you're back on the show. You've been away. Where have you been, and what was the weather there?
I was in Durban. It's always a pleasure being in the real world. I'm back in the twilight zone where things don't work, but it is home, and I love the weather here. And I'm glad to be back on the show. You guys desecrated the bar last week. You had 2 teetotalers. So I'm back to set things straight. Have some interesting...
Before we talk about that, maybe let's introduce our guest to the show. We've got the illustrious Eddie Cross. You've been around the block for quite a bit, so we're quite happy to have you here. As we say, we are ready to get our gloves on and let's have a fight.
That's great. I don't mind a fight, I've got a thick skin. I've been in politics for a long time, so bring it on.
Fantastic. So we'll start with you, Vora. What are you having?
So I'm having one of my favorite types of whiskey, a very peaty Scotch. I haven't tried this one before. It's so peaty they decided to call it Smokehead, and it's an Islay single malt, and it's non-chill filtered, which means it's very rich in flavor. And thankfully, I'm all by myself here having this. George is away, so I have all the tipple to myself. Cheers.
Fantastic. Well, on this corner, we have the Kericho Gold from Kenya. I love it. I absolutely love it. And there's so much that's happening in Kenya. And, I was just saying that in 1990, Zimbabwe was actually bigger than Kenya, and now Kenya is like 150 billion GDP, and we're nowhere near that. But we do partake in their tea. It's lovely tea, and I'll share it with Eddie Cross.
Yes,
so
I must say, I like it. I like it very much. Yeah,
fantastic.
And I must say I agree with you about Kenya. Kenya's doing amazingly well. I think Kenya is rapidly becoming one of Africa's most progressive cities in the world, and for some reason Kenyans seem to be able to do stuff that we're not doing, but we're learning.
What did they get right that we didn't get right?
I tell you, there's been a lot of corruption in Kenya, but Kenyans spend their corrupt money at home. Unfortunately, Zimbabweans tend to take their money elsewhere.
And, I wonder why.
Yeah.
We'll talk more about that.
Yeah, one of the problems is monetary instability.
True. Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And to kick off the show, we're going to start with the first segment. And what we're going to talk about is the gold mafia debacle and expose. And with respect to you, you came out very strong with the SABC, and you said Hubert Angel had lost his ambassadorship at large. Would you like to tell us exactly in what authority you were speaking from and what's actually happening there? Is he still our ambassador at large?
No. I mean, Hubert embarrassed the government of Zimbabwe. Worse than that, he embarrassed the president. And I want to tell you, when that happens, there are consequences. A small cabinet committee has been formed. They have reviewed the programs, all 4, and action has been taken, appropriate action has been taken. And if I was Hubert, I would stay in the UK, look after his British passport, burn his Zimbabwe passport, because he's not coming back here. If he comes back here, there will be consequences.
But in what authority are you speaking like this?
Zimbabwe, I'm a Zimbabwean.
But you're speaking about what's happening in cabinet.
I don't have any special position.
Yeah, we haven't heard Nick Mangwana come out and actually tell us what's actually happening as far as government policy is concerned. So I want to understand, if you're speaking, are you speculating or are you telling us what is actually happening? And if you're telling us what's actually happening, on what basis are you doing so?
Well, Mangwana is a propagandist. All right?
Okay.
I have lots of friends in government. And for some peculiar reason, since 2017, I've been working with the president in many different forms, and I think I understand the man. I'm his biographer. I wrote his biography. He asked me once, Eddie, why are you doing this? I said, because I'm being paid. Okay.
It's always a good reason.
Yeah, I was contracted to do it. But apart from that, for me, that was a learning experience, because I had to talk to him. We had sessions together. And of course, I meet him periodically when we have key problems to discuss, and whether he wants advice on any issues. And so I understand the man. And one thing I do know, he's aptly described, is a crocodile. Crocodiles attack fast. And when they do attack, it's often fatal. And but you don't see it coming. And he's not a man who makes his views public. He's a very, very reserved man, in fact. In fact, since 1980, I've bumped into him from time to time, right from 1980, even before 1980, when we were leading up to independence, because I supported the liberation struggle. And I can tell you that although he played a crucial role in government right through the Mugabe era, he was always in the background. Okay. And he's not changing.
Yeah, there's something about the little that you've said that has piqued my interest, which is you've got a very colorful history in our country as a business person, as an opposition leader, and yet you have the capacity. You've shown the capacity and still do to put all of your previous fights aside and think of yourself firstly as a Zimbabwean and interact and engage with the government of the day to help them, right? Notwithstanding what names people might call you for working with particular personalities. And when I think about the rest of the business community in particular, I find that they tend to prefer to be mum, not to say anything. The few that do tend to just parrot the government's narrative of the day, and only a tiny fraction actually call a spade. But even rarer than those who say anything are people who've put their hand up and said, you know what, guys, if you need my expertise on anything, right, whether I'm available. And why do you think that is such a rare quality in our members of our business community?
Ultimately, I'm a nationalist. Have been right from the very beginning. And we had to make a decision as a family when the Liberation War was raging. Were we going to stay? I knew that the Liberation War would be lost by the white community. I knew that. I knew we were wasting our time. I spoke to Ian Smith in 1973, and I told him that. And I said, you're going to win all the battles, you're going to lose the war. And when you do lose the war, what are you going to do? And so I'm a nationalist. And when we made a decision as a family to stay in Zimbabwe, I was offered a job in Switzerland in 1976 in commodity trading. And we went to have a look.
Very lucrative.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I went to have a look. We travelled around Europe, travelled around Britain a bit. We came home and we consulted our children, and we said, we are Africans. That's not our home. So we made the decision to stay. Now, once you make the decision to stay in the country, you've got to help make it work in your little zone. So when, in 2017, in the middle of the coup, when I got a call from the president's office to say, would I be prepared to help with the problems that are coming up in the lift? What do when your president phones you? What do? Do you tell him, no, Kweti, I'm not helping you? No, you climb in. In fact, it was a privilege to help. And I played a small role, a peripheral role, done a few things people don't like. But for me, the fundamental motivation is the country. This is my country. This is home.
Okay,
well, I applaud that perspective.
So now that we are very clear about where you stand and
right.
The authority in which you speak, and you're speaking very authoritatively about these issues.
I don't have any authority. I'm not
you're saying
minister.
You're very close to.
That doesn't give me authority.
Okay, all right, okay.
I simply.
But he's got insights and access.
But also, I'm not going to tell you what I don't believe.
Okay.
Okay.
Fantastic. What do you think is going to happen?
With what?
With the gold mafia. Is there anything that's going to happen?
Well, Macmillan has fled.
Yes.
And I think wisely. I think he was extremely stupid to make the remarks that he did, especially the racial ones. His father was deported by Mugabe for the same things, gold trading. His father.
Okay.
Okay. So there will be.
Was any of what he said true?
I think it was
that his partner is the president.
No, not at all. That's complete nonsense.
All right.
That's anybody who knows Emerson will know that that's not true. Emerson has no partner. It's like Mugabe had no friends. Mugabe was a loner. He really was. Not even inside the cabinet. Nobody close to Mugabe. He was always his own man. This man.
All right.
Look, he has associates. He has people that he trusts. A very small group. I can count them on two hands. Okay. But that's where it's limited. All this talk. I mean, this talk by Angel. I can phone the president. I can get an appointment with the president. Give me $200,000. Absolute nonsense.
Okay.
Absolute nonsense.
And Simon Rodland. I think
Simon is
very elaborate on what actually happens, the money laundering. And
Simon is a big player.
Okay.
He is a major player. I mean, he and his brother, I would think, are probably two of the biggest businessmen in Zimbabwe. These two boys operate in their billions. They're both billionaires. Not quite as rich as Strive Masiwa, but I think getting close. What they do, I mean, cigarette smuggling, everybody knows that.
No, we don't know that.
Yeah, of course you do. Have you been to the factory? Just go and look at the factory. I mean, they smuggle cigarettes into South Africa. And
does Zimra know this?
Of course, yes.
Zimra knows that they're smuggling cigarettes?
Of course, yes.
Okay.
Of course, yes. The question is how to control it.
All right.
And I mean, the border is totally porous. Okay. And these boys make millions out of that business. And the cost to the South African exchequer is huge because of the loss of taxes and sales tax and so on. On the gold side, they're one of the big boys. They're not the biggest. I think Scott Sakopanya is bigger.
Okay.
And you think Scott was
Mr. Gold.
Yeah, but he was Macmillan's gardener. Do you know that?
No, we don't know this.
He was a domestic servant. He was Macmillan's gardener. And he's a very big boy now. I mean, I would say Scott is one of the biggest gold traders in the world. And he's done it. And let's give these guys credit where credit is due. You've got to be tough. You've got to be sharp. And he's both. And he has lawyers advising him, and he has financial people and security people and so on, because he's in a high risk game. And he's made a success of it.
Okay.
And Kennedy, how did the Kennedys make their money? Prohibition. criminal activity. Okay?
So are you saying that Zimbabwe is a criminal activity?
Gee, in many respects, we're a criminal state. But, but let me say this about the whole gold thing. These guys are buying gold in Zimbabwe. Okay? They're paying hard currency for it. A gram of gold is worth about $70. The miner is probably getting $40 to $50 for that. So these guys are taking a margin. With that margin, they've got to take the risk. They've got to carry cash into the field, right? They've got to get the stuff to a refinery. They've got to cross a border, right? Then they've got to have it refined. That's costly. And then they've got to sell it. And and I think if you add all those elements...
They're not short of buyers.
Of course they're not.
Yeah.
Of course they're not.
Okay.
But they've got to go through the whole process. I mean, I've talked to the refineries in South Africa, and they say the stuff arrives at their refinery in all ways. One guy told me a truck drove in, and the driver took the front bumper off the truck, and it was loaded with gold. One of the things I want to ask the authorities, especially the South African authorities, if it's true that we are exporting 70 tons of gold a year across the South African border,
We will get into that because I need to push back.
Why are there no arrests? Why are there no prosecutions? And the reason is they're compliant.
Well, SARS has actually lodged, I think it's a 15 billion rand law case that's actually in the courts of South Africa, where they were prejudiced, 15 billion rand.
With whom? With agents?
With certain traders.
Gold
traders.
or cigarettes?
Gold.
Gold.
Traders.
Yeah, you see, what they were doing, the refiners, so it's their own people, it's not us.
Well, it's companies in South Africa
It's their refineries. There are
that were
six
claiming VAT that they shouldn't.
that they shouldn't.
Yeah,
do.
exactly. And
But
that's
that-
in South
but that-
Africa.
but that
But
would-
before we get
yes.
there, because I want us to zero down on
Okay.
some of the things that you said that we're going to push back on. The one thing that you have said is from this gold mafia, you say that actually this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yes.
That there's actually more smuggling that's happening. But if you listen in, there were suggestions or allegations that actually what happens is gold is actually brought into Zimbabwe because we're actually not producing that much, because the real business is actually money laundering and not the gold. What's your perspective on that?
Right.
Because I need to push back
First of all, the
on
production.
that. Yeah,
Production
exactly.
side. We have 600 gold mines. These are formal sector gold mines, producing from 2 kgs to 50, 100 kgs a month. 600. And we know what their production is. Their production is 25 tons, something like that. Okay?
20 tons historically, but we've got the spikes where we
They
get to 25.
they don't sell all their gold to Fidelity.
Okay.
All right? I know gold miners that are selling part to Fidelity and there's a trading part. Because remember, Fidelity doesn't pay 100% in US dollars, 60%.
No, the small miners actually pay 100%.
Yeah.
It's the big
Wait a
miners.
minute, yeah,
But
but
if
we're
you think about it, 70% of our production is now small miners.
Yeah, that's correct. Now, that's the formal sector. The informal sector, we know there are between 500,000 and 700,000 small-scale miners, Makorokosa.
How do you know that?
Right. The SADC, our guys, the Southern African, what do they call it? The Southern African Development Community has a unit in Johannesburg which looks at resource exploitation. They had a team here. They went around the country. They investigated it thoroughly. They produced a report, and they said there are a minimum of 500,000. The Association of Small-Scale Miners
But
themselves...
we need to question that.
No,
That's
no,
not
no,
true.
no.
I think that's a lot of propaganda.
No,
You're
no.
accusing
No, no.
Nick Mangwana of being a propagandist.
No, no,
But
wait
I
a
think
minute.
you're also
No, no.
propagating propaganda.
You're obviously a city boy. If you knew what was going on in the rural areas, you know that is a fact. If you speak to the
I'm
small...
an economist, so
That
the way I
doesn't-
look at it
that
is
doesn't- that-
consumption. So if
No,
a
wait
lot
a
of
minute.
these
No, wait a minute.
korokoses
Wait a minute.
are in production,
Wait a minute.
I should be able to see their
Let-
consumption.
Right,
I don't
let's-
see it in the numbers.
Let me just give you what the facts are.
Yes.
All right. There are 500,000 at least. They are to some extent seasonal. You know, when the rains come, they shut down their small-scale operation because of water, flooding and stuff like that, and they also go and grow crops. So they come and go. But I spoke, there are about 2,000 mills operating in this field. 2,000 guys with stamp mills and ball mills. And I spoke to a couple of guys in the Kadoma area who are running this as a business. And they said they look after probably about 10 square kilometers of small-scale miners. They deliver their ore to them. They then get access to the mill, and then they process it, and they get the product from the tables or from the cyclone that on the other side. And that represents about 60% of the gold content. It's the loose gold. And then they get that assayed, and they either sell it on the spot or they take it to an agent. Now, if they're just doing 1 gram a week, it's 50 tons. Just 1 gram.
2,000.
1 gram.
2,000 doing 1
500,000.
That would be 2,000 grams. You say 2,000. 500,000.
Now 500,000 miners. Okay. Now I stood at that mill and I watched the guys bring in. They bring in 5 tons of ore at the time in a tip truck. Okay. Tip it. They watch it go through the mill. They collect their gold. They go to the laboratory. They get it assayed.
So why is it we don't see this consumption?
Right, because
if a lot of these people are earning, so we don't care how they're getting their money,
yeah,
but eventually they're getting some money.
It's smuggled.
So if they're getting, they're smuggling. Yeah, you're talking about the production, and I am saying that same Korokoza that's producing, yes, his gold is smuggled, so we don't see the numbers through Reserve Bank, but surely that Korokoza is spending. He's buying something in the shops.
Yes.
Why is it we don't see that?
But
those numbers we don't see.
But it's there.
No, but we don't see it.
No, but I think we see the numbers.
That's not true.
If you look at a company like Delta, and you look at their beer volumes, their carbonated soft drink volumes, they've been increasing, and while the rest of the formal sector has been shrinking, and I suspect that a lot of the additional consumption is not happening in bars like this. It's happening,
Okay, so let me tell you how I look at it and why I don't believe those numbers, and I still insist that they're not true. Is when you look at consumption. So if you say 500,000 people are involved in some sort of gold mining, right? In Ghana, it's closer to maybe 200,000 people that are involved in gold production. Ghana produces about 140, 150 tons of gold, right? And you can see their consumption, right? Eventually you see it. But in Zimbabwe, if you look at our GDP, and I will be generous and say our GDP is $25 billion. And of that $25 billion,
but that's complete nonsense. That's complete nonsense.
Otherwise, we wouldn't have the problems that we have.
Look, no. There's plenty of foreign exchange in this country. There's no shortage of foreign exchange. Okay?
We wouldn't be the worst performing currency in the world.
No, forget the currency. No, forget the currency. The currency, that's a different matter completely. In terms of hard currency, okay, this country, we've got plenty of hard currency. There's no shortage, okay? No shortage at all. There are no shortages here, right? And part of the reason is the gold. You look at housing, okay? Let me just take one element, housing. How many houses are under construction in Zimbabwe today?
I wouldn't have the actual number.
Just guess. Just guess. There are 1.2 million housing units today with title deeds. How many houses do you think are under construction? And just look at Harare. You drive it out of Harare in any direction. Seki, 40 kilometers. Dombashawa, almost to Bandura. Rua, right? Any direction you take. What do you see?
Lots of construction.
Caledonia is bigger than Guerre.
One could argue that that's diaspora remittances.
No, I don't know where the money comes from. Now that it's the government, but it's the biggest building boom in our history. We're selling 4 million tons of cement a year now.
No, absolutely, I agree with those
and
numbers.
These kids...
But I don't think it's coming from gold.
No,
so my question was around the gold smuggling, that the numbers, I would put it to you, that the numbers are actually overstated because there's money laundering.
Have you spoken to the South African refineries, who say that 70% of their throughput, 70, comes from Zimbabwe.
Through Zimbabwe.
No, from
Through
Zimbabwe.
borders.
Now look, the question of smuggling, I can tell you almost.
Because it could be coming from the DRC.
Can I tell you this?
From
This guy, Brother Paul, that
Yeah.
Indian guy, he's
Partly.
he's the main smuggler. He's the main buyer of smuggled gold. We have perhaps 1,000 trucks a day transiting Zimbabwe, and they come from the DRC and Zambia. And these drivers carry gold, and they sell gold here. And it's these guys that are buying that. And he reckons that the smuggled gold is about 30 tons.
Okay. All right. We'll continue that discussion, but we need to move on. So the next question that I have for you, and I think we've touched a bit on it, is around the currency. Now, you've been on record, especially after the new Second Republic, you came out and you said, I think the rate in October then, after the elections, the rate in October went to 6.
After we launched the new currency,
Exactly.
the RTGS dollar.
And you said that 6, the rate was probably around 4 and not 6. And this is in 2018. Today, we hear the rate is
2,200.
200. Right? What do you say to that?
Well, the authorities have to...
Or are you going to first admit that you got it wrong?
No, not at all. Not at all. Let's just look at the Medicais and the Pula and the Kwacha. All right? The Medicais today is 63 to 1. It's been stable for a couple of years. No changes. The Kwacha is stronger than the Rand. The Pula...
Not anymore, but yeah, I get your point.
Yeah, the Pula is stronger than the Rand. All right? Now, what happened? How did they turn that around? It's a very simple lesson. That's what I keep on telling the authorities here. They simply trade their currency properly in a regular market. And when we were having problems with the currency 2.5 years ago, and the president called us in to State House and said, what, and we were about 8 of us businessmen with him, and he asked us, what is wrong? Why is the currency so unstable? We said to him, there's no proper market. So he sat on that for 2 weeks, and then we had the auction established, which he gave an instruction to the governor and said, I want you to auction the US dollars. It ran fine for about a year, and we had reasonable stability for a while. But then the Reserve Bank started messing it around.
So your thoughts on the currency?
Look, I tend to be a simpleton when I think about the devaluation of the Zim dollar and high inflation. I think it's just printing, and
That's not, you're not being a simpleton. That's it. That's what happened in Germany between the 2 world wars. That's what happened in Yugoslavia. That's what happened under Gorno. You print money, you devalue the currency. It's as simple as that.
So what vexes me and what I find amazing, is that we simply not having an honest conversation about the true causes of the devaluation, and we come up with these distractions like the gold coin, which we've now decided we are going to digitize. That's not going to solve anything. So I'm curious to get your perspective, since you sat on the Monetary Policy Committee. I mean, the sense that I get as a capital markets player in Harare and Zimbabwe is that the central bank does not engage with the business community, does not engage with the market. They have their brain trusts, and they come up with their ideas that they think are better than anything the market might come up with, and then they just execute without talking to anybody. But they obviously had somebody of your caliber on the committee for many months, for
a few months. Then they kicked me into touch.
Am I characterizing them correctly? Are they insular? Is it closed?
I think it's all of the above. It's all of the above. The question is, why do they do it? Because, at independence, the first cabinet independence, 38 ministers, 17 had a PhD. was the best educated cabinet in Africa. How come we screwed up the whole thing so badly? Because we have screwed it up. We really have. You know, looking at Korea and China and Vietnam and everything else, and Kenya, Ghana. Ghana's moving, you know. And yet we've really screwed things up here, and ask the reason why. Because we're better than that. We know what to do. And I think the reality is that we have a criminal element here which is making a lot of money out of fresh air.
How do we stop it?
Markets. Markets. That's what he said to the president. Have a decent market for foreign exchange. And you know, you take Mozambique. Mozambique's economy is tiny. Their total consumption of power is 500 megawatts. Our consumption of power is 2,400. You know, we've got the biggest economy in the region by a long way. And by the way, our GDP is nothing like what the official people say. I said to the IMF when they were here last time, I said, you guys have no idea how Zimbabwe works. Our GDP is at least double what the official guys say. At least double. Because 70% of our economy is informalized. You know, you talked about the influence of the big retailers. This Varum, these new Indian guys, been here for 4 years. They've doubled and trebled, and now they've quadrupled their investment because they can't meet demand. And
you're talking about the guys who own Pepsi?
yes,
Yeah.
and I mean, they tell me that 70% of their sales are in the informal sector. 70%.
Tell me something, because you were the official, was it official or unofficial biographer?
I'm
President.
I'm never official,
Okay, so.
but I
unofficial.
did his biography. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. But you spend a bit of time with him.
Yes.
Tell me something. What does he think of our currency and the currency problems?
Tell you, he's not an economist.
Okay.
Okay, he's a clever man, but he's largely self-educated. You remember he joined the liberation struggle when he was 16, and he literally came out of the bush, and it was a Catholic priest who found this kid in prison, in Harare Central Prison, in D-class prison, 16 years of age or 18 years of age, with his very limited education, but clever man, clever boy. And for the next 10 years, he took him through O-levels, took him through university. He got a law degree in prison. So he's got a natural intelligence. He's no fool.
Okay.
Right. He came out of prison, was then deported to Zambia, where he became a lawyer under Enoch Dumbochena. Took him a couple of years to get his thing. The moment he did that, he left Zambia and went to Mozambique, where he joined the struggle. And from the moment he landed, Tongogara saw how this was a really sharp kid and made him head of their security. He was head of zone security right the way through to Lancaster House. And then after Lancaster House, he was appointed Minister of State Security. And, you know, when he was Minister of Finance, in fact, he did actually quite a good job. But he readily admits that he doesn't know anything about money, and he doesn't know anything about economics. Okay, so he takes advice. One of my problems is that he takes advice from too many people. You know, I think he should listen to me. Me only. But that's another matter.
The question that follows naturally from what you're saying is that one of my gripes with the business community is that we, apart from not putting our hand up, is over the decades we haven't done any work to engender trust with the government, so that when we actually speak about these issues, whether it's the currency, whether it's allocating spending, how to deal with parastatals or whatever, we're kind of looked at through this lens of an adversary as bad actors who just want to profiteer, you know, at the expense of the country. So what work do you know, if you were advising a gathering of business of leaders, of business leaders who want to improve their standing with the government, you know, so that when we present a paper on something, it's not viewed through this lens of greed or sabotage. It's viewed through the lens of we actually want the economy to do better. We actually want things to work, and these are our ideas. You know, how do you think we can bridge that gap?
It's difficult, eh? Let me just say one thing. One thing I've found from the president's own experience. His experience of businessmen is that very often they come to him with their ideas, but with an ulterior motive. And I'm telling you, if you take an idea to the president and the president thinks that you're personally going to benefit from it, he dismisses your point of view straight away. Okay, I think if you come to the president and you've presented that, look, I have no interest in this particular thing at all, but this is what I think you should be doing. Believe me, he listens. He listens, and we had when he won the election in 2018. SP Moyo, who by the way was the best minister in cabinet. SP was a great guy. He really was. He was a fantastic minister. SP got a group of us together, and he called us the Stabilization Task Force. And he used us as
Who was in there?
Joe Mutizwa, Kumbarai Katsandi, Glenn Cohen, Much Masunda, key senior business leaders, but businessmen with a basic integrity, and honest businessmen. I mean, there's lots of crooks out there.
For sure.
Okay? And there's lots of guys out there with a secondary agenda. Okay? And when they consulted us and we said to them, look, you've got to do this and this and that. For example, when we were short of fuel and we were short of mealie meal and cooking oil, and you couldn't buy these basics in the shops because they were short. SB called us in because he was Minister of Trade, in addition to being Foreign Affairs. He called us in and he asked us, what would we do? And everybody was there. The Jock was there, 6 ministers at the top table, permanent secretaries, heads of parastatals. And he said, what would you guys do? And we stood up and we said to him, give the problem to us. We will take over the importation of these products and their pricing and distribution. Just let the market work. And he did it. I'm telling you, the head of a parastatal in that meeting, whose business was this field, walked out of that meeting in anger. And if I had been the minister responsible, I would have fired him. Okay? But anyway, they gave us the problem, and we fixed the problem. In weeks, we had no queues for fuel. And in weeks, we were importing 120,000 tons of maize a month.
Wow.
And with the president, when we saw the president, we were discussing this business of trading currency. He had us in there over dinner. We were seated around. He asked us, each of us, for our view. We told him what we thought. It was a consensus. He acted on it.
Okay, so that's on advice, right? But instinctually, how does the president react? So when he's reading the newspapers, when he hears the rate, what's his instinctual?
He's very concerned about it, obviously.
Okay.
I mean, right now we've got a huge crisis. This can't be ignored.
Okay, maybe let me make my question even clearer. So
Yeah.
I know you're a free market believer. Are these guys, do they believe in the free market, or they are socialist or communist?
I don't know of any African socialist or communist.
That's good to hear.
Yeah,
Or as Miles terms, the champagne socialist.
that's more like it. I
Well, Marx, that was Marx. The actual Karl Marx himself was a champagne socialist. He grew up in aristocracy and money, and he didn't.
But if you take, for example, Kenya, there was a young man appointed there as Commissioner of Corruption Commissioner. Okay, he was a young guy. He was a young accountant. He was 35 or 37. It didn't last very long, okay, because it's just too hot a potato. But he wrote a book, and he called it Our Turn to Eat.
Yes.
Now, you come from an impoverished background, okay? And I mean really impoverished. You're herding cattle in Zishavani and looking after the goats. You don't go to school until you're 12. You then leave school when you're 16. Okay, you hardly ever had even a penny in your pocket. Your parents were peasant farmers. And then suddenly, you're president of the country. And you discover the Reserve Bank. And you discover I can pick up the phone and I can phone the governor and say, I want $3 million to go on holiday, please. And a cardboard box arrives. And that's the truth. That actually happened.
But also our laws allow it. If you
No,
think about it.
forget the laws.
Okay.
This is a power issue, you know, and it's part of our culture. Okay, you know, when a rich man, I mean, you take away these young guys who don't make anything, and they don't produce anything, but they're wealthy, and you know what from, all right?
Yes.
Okay, so with Lamborghinis and so on, this Wadzajena, you know, he buys a car that you can't drive in the road, but he's MP for Gokwe, you know. He needs a Toyota Land Cruiser. He doesn't need a Lamborghini with 6 inches of blooming. So,
To be fair, he does have a Land Cruiser as well.
as well,
Yes.
okay. But I mean,
He's a cop of, but look,
but
so
he
actually,
struts about with it, okay. And you know, and
You know,
you know,
the-
it's not legitimate.
production.
But you know what our people do? Our people respect him because he's a chef.
But-
that's our culture.
but here's a question that follows naturally from what you're saying. One of the problems that we have in Africa and in Zimbabwe in particular, in my opinion, is that we have borrowed this idea from the West, where typically members of parliament and ministers come from the aristocracy. They are already wealthy in their own right before they serve. So when they join government in
It's
these
pro
leadership,
bono.
yeah, it's you know, they're serving. They're not there to earn a living, right?
But that's not the case in
But
Africa.
but this is Zimbabwe, right? That's not true.
But that's not the case in Africa.
Exactly.
It's not just that. It's not just Zimbabwe.
It's across
It's the entire continent.
right.
But
So there was this huge controversy. You know, well, I wouldn't call it a controversy, but there were lots of noises in certain quarters about these $500,000 loans to ministers to buy houses, and my personal perspective was that's perfectly okay. These guys should live in 500,000. If you're running a ministry, you're like a CEO of a major corporation, right? You should actually be paid enough to buy a property like that outright. It shouldn't be a loan. You shouldn't be on a salary that's peanuts and then have to depend on handouts and perks and loans. So what is the thinking, from your interactions with government? Why is it that we have this mindset where we think that it's honorable, something that we can actually show off that these guys are on these minuscule salaries? Meanwhile, they're running these huge organizations.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look. When I was an MP in Parliament, my first salary check was $50 on a month. All right. A Kenyan MP gets $12,000 a year, a month. $140,000 a year. And even when the economy had recovered, my salary wasn't more than a couple of grand a month. And you can't buy a car with that, so they gave us cars. You certainly couldn't buy a house with that. And it is a problem. In the Rhodesian days, the principal, for example, was a permanent secretary, received 80% of the salary of a chief executive in the private sector. And we had permanent secretaries who were outstanding and top flight intellectual with good degrees. The French have always followed that principle. Okay? And then along comes, this new government. They have no experience of government. They've been in the bush. They've got this ideology from China and from the Soviet,
Mao, of all thinkers.
and from
gosh.
and from the Soviet Union, right? I mean, I was a chief executive of big parastatals, and from 1980 until 1987, and in that period of time, 7 years, my salary never increased 1 cent. So at the end of that period of time, I didn't even own a motor car. And now that is not right. Okay, that is not right. But that is what these guys have been contending with. Even today, I mean, I talked to Oprah Muchinguri on Saturday. And she said to me, you know, I'm getting close to, I don't know how old Oprah is. She doesn't look her age. But, you know, she said to me, I'm about to retire. And, you know, she said to me,
You'll be most welcome.
it's a real problem. I don't have anything to retire on.
Oh, okay.
You know,
That's
because if you're not a crook, and let me tell you, there are honest ministers. You know, in Tlovo at tourism, he's as straight as a die. The new minister of transport, straight as a die. So there is a younger generation coming up, but we need to pay them properly, and we're not.
So we do have a mafia state.
Well, I wouldn't call it a mafia state.
I wouldn't say it's a mafia state. We have a club.
My question is why do we think paying peanuts makes sense?
It doesn't make sense.
You're saying it doesn't make
But
sense.
we do.
But we
No,
do.
in
Precisely.
other
Why?
ways.
I think it's
Because they
fine.
make money in other ways.
Yeah,
so
but,
that's why I want to define.
but also it's growing up. You don't think this happened in Britain? Just how did they build those castles in Britain? That was built with the income of the poor.
Tax.
Extortion. Okay, and you know, and if you became a rich person during those days, what were you doing?
Okay, so what I want to understand is when you look at corruption and criminal activity, what you have actually said is, I think it's endemic right across Africa, or even in Southeast Asia, even in China to some extent. But what differentiates us from everywhere else, even Kenya, if you think about it, is that the criminals keep their money in the country. So
Elsewhere.
if you look at elsewhere,
They
so
don't
if
do
you
it
look
here.
at if you look at Kenya, they will do whatever they're doing, but they trust the financial system in Kenya,
Yeah.
and they
And-
trust the laws
and-
in
and-
Kenya,
and they trust-
that their money will be
And they trust the
protected.
currency.
And they trust the currency.
They work in shillings. And
So, do you think that there's a why don't we trust our own systems and processes? Because we're actually in charge of them, right?
because of our experience.
But now you're in charge of the processes.
I'm not.
What I mean is the people who do this, right? They're in charge of the
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
So why don't they ensure that the system is stable? At the very least, ensure that the system is stable. Then you can still do whatever you want to do.
You know, now I remember a few years ago I was doing business in Tanzania, and I was driving through Lusaka and then going across to northern Tanzania where this business was, and I was supplying them with coal from Wanki by rail. Quite a big business. So every 2 or 3 months I had to go through. I went to Lusaka. I walked into a bank, and I produced $100 note in a bank. And I wanted to change it into kwacha because I wanted it for the road. So the guy looked at the $100 note and he said, how do you want it? I said, I want cash. He said, well, look, so you'll have to go and get a plastic bag. So I had to
It
go,
reminds me of Zimbabwe, 2007,
I had to
2008.
go outside and buy a large plastic bag, a rubbish bag. And when he gave me the money, it was like this, okay? When I filled up with fuel, the road attendant didn't bother to count the money. It was in blocks, counted by the bank. He counted the blocks, and that was kwacha.
So tell me something from your experience on the MPC, because we have chronic cash shortages. We issue these notes. We don't issue enough of them. Why do we bother? We might as well function as a cashless economy. Why do we have these Zim dollar notes that, there was a picture that went viral last week of a 20 Zim dollar note that was on the floor somewhere, and
No one accepts it.
nobody was interested in
Well,
picking it up.
But let me tell you another story about Southern Africa. 1987, I was the chief executive of the Beira Corridor Group. I traveled to Beira by road, okay? When I was in Beira, I was using US dollars and getting metikash back as change. So when I had finished, I had a 20-litre bucket of metikash, full. So I thought, what do I do with this stuff? So we're driving back to Zimbabwe. We go through a village. There's a market there selling bits and pieces on the road, including coconuts. So I said to my companion, let's buy some coconuts and take them home. So we stopped the car, got out, went up to this lady and said, what can I buy for the medication? She emptied the medication on the ground and told me for the bucket she would give me 3 coconuts.
That's hilarious.
But that was 3 decades ago. But now it's happening here.
Yeah, it's happening here, and it's a tragedy because we are the most sophisticated community in the region.
More literate, educated.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, we're managing South Africa. You know,
All our
600,000
technocrats. Yeah.
600,000 professionals in South Africa. And this is the kind of nonsense we're going through. But that's where these people came from. But I was in Maputo last week on Thursday, negotiating power for Zimbabwe. And I tell you, I was amazed at Maputo.
Yeah, it is amazing.
I was
It's
amazed.
changed substantially.
It was so exciting.
So perhaps to take that point further, because I was in Maputo, I think last year February, and I was blown away as well. It's just
It's clean, modern.
so. How does Harare get to where Maputo is?
And remember, Maputo, Mozambique is also corrupt. You know the case of the 20 billion.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So, but they're still developing. So, in tandem with that question, so why can't we get these people or everybody who's doing whatever they do to invest in a stable Zimbabwe?
Do you remember what the new king of Saudi Arabia did when he came to power? And he brought in those 500 young princes. Remember?
Mm-hmm.
He gave each one of them a list of their overseas bank accounts with the money. He said, now, I know exactly your money. Okay, and the Americans know where all the money is.
Yes.
I've seen an American report which says how much money Grace Mugabe has got and where it is.
How much is it?
5.3.
Billion.
Yep.
$5.3 billion dollars.
Mm-hmm. And it's in Europe. And the Americans know precisely where it is. Okay, so this Saudi.
But Eddie, that's big news. I mean,
No,
this is another one of your.
where do you?
I mean, okay.
Well, you know, when Mugabe
Where's
said,
that coming
when,
from? Where's that coming from?
Diamonds.
How do you know? How do you know it's 5.3 billion?
Diamonds and fuel.
How do you know? Where's the evidence?
I've seen a report.
Let's leave this rabbit hole alone.
Okay. now, but let me tell you this. So this Saudi king calls in these princes, and he gives each of them a schedule, and he says, this is how much money you've got outside the country. You're going to go into that 5-star hotel. You're not coming out until I am satisfied that you've brought the money home and you're investing it here. So he put 500 of these guys, I think it was about 500, into a 5-star hotel, and he put the army on the gate. And none of those guys came out until the king.
Yeah, it was the fanciest prison ever.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
The
Okay,
Ritz-Carlton.
My producer's telling me we need to move on.
No, I think that's what we've got to really do here. And in fact, I think there's some evidence that the president is doing that.
Okay.
I mean, Kuda, I think, has had some treatment. I think Simon Rutland has had some treatment. And you know, Simon is investing in everything here. He's buying everything in sight. And so is Kuda.
Okay.
So is Kuda.
All right. Okay, so my producer says we must move on. So this is the last bit, and we want to talk about going forward. And the first thing I want to talk about is re-engagement with the international community. I think when the Second Republic came in 2017, the one thing that almost everybody agreed on is re-engagement with the international community. Where are we, and where do you see that going?
Yeah, I'm just going to add a little bit of color to that. You know, one of the things that I was very delighted to hear in 2017 was that phrase, Zimbabwe is open for business. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. But we sadly seem to have failed to live up to that mantra. So if you think about it in the context of the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange and foreign direct investment, it's basically been on a downward trajectory since November 2017, since we were talking about being open for business. A lot of that has to do with the currency, because if I'm talking to a guy in London or New York
Yeah.
that's looking at bringing in 10 million US dollars, and they want to do everything properly and legally.
Yeah.
The official rate is 1,021. The power market rate is 2,200. Right? These guys are some of the smartest allocators of capital on the planet. Right?
Yeah.
They know these things. So the idea that they're going to wire 10 million US dollars to Harare and immediately lose half their value, and then make all sorts of investments, and it's unclear that they'll be able to get out even if they make money after that. It blows my mind. And you know, I think it was this week that we had our Minister of Finance and a bunch of capital market players in London trying to sell, you know, investment in Zimbabwe. And I was incredulous. I thought for sure that their hearts are in the right place, but nobody's going to wire money into Zim on those terms and
Mission impossible.
on those terms and conditions. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about re-engagement for a bit. The president, in his inauguration speech in 2017, after he became president, made that speech about re-engagement and reform, which was received very positive response from the international community. European Union opened us up, gave us access to the development funds for the European Union and so on. The same thing happened after 2018, when he virtually repeated the same speech at Rufaro Stadium. No, it wasn't Rufaro, it was National Sports Stadium. And the question is, why was that not followed through? Well, there were two reasons. Number one, there was violence after 2018. And although the South African president, Motlanthe, found that the MDC was responsible for the violence and that the army had been deployed properly, the international community said this was a no-no. And then there was the January violence, where the president was in Russia on a bilateral visit, and there was serious violence in Harare, and several people were shot again. Same situation. And that set back the whole political dialogue. And
I can see how dead bodies can change the mood.
Yeah. And in the Zadera Act was promulgated in 2001. And it was promulgated by the Americans in response to the human rights violations, the invasions of farms, the abuse of property rights, the rule of law. It was pandemonium. I was in the opposition trenches. Believe me, it was war. It was war. And they imposed sanctions. And those sanctions, which are the only sanctions regime in the world promulgated by an act of Congress. There are 62 countries under sanctions. All the rest, 61, have sanctions imposed on them by the president. And they can be changed by the president's dictate. He just sign them off. You can't do that with Zadera. You've got to get Congress to remove the act. And Zadera has been renewed every year in March since then. It's the longest running sanctions program in world history. And it hasn't changed anything here at all. Now, when S.B. Moyo was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, he asked us, the stabilization team, that small group of guys, would we help with this re-engagement process? And we said yes, but only on condition that the government behaves itself. No more violations, okay? And they gave us an undertaking, and we then set about. So we did an audit of the Zimbabwe government's progress against Zadera, because Zadera's requirements are very clear. And the result of that audit, which was conducted by someone who had worked for the State Department for 32 years, was that we implemented about 70%. Some of them we've implemented 100%. Others we haven't been quite so clever. When we presented that to the American government, they said we recognize that progress has been made, but it's not enough. And they said we want to see 2023 elections. If 2023 is okay, if you can behave yourself into that period, then we will sit down and consider changing things. Now, we've made progress with the European Union. There's no doubt about that. We've made progress with Canada and Australia. I mean, 2 years ago, when we attempted to get back into the Commonwealth, it was Australia, Canada, and Britain. They said the ABC, which blocked us from going in.
Yeah.
Today, Canada and Australia are prepared to have us back.
Okay. So if I get you correctly, you're saying we're on track.
We're on track, and we've made progress, but not enough.
Not enough. What would you change?
And it's critical.
What are the three things that we need to do?
Well, it's very interesting. You know that the European Union has launched a dialogue with the government of Zimbabwe around the 3 pillars.
Yes.
And the 3 pillars are governance, debt management, and agriculture. Okay, how to put agriculture back on its feet, because 70% of our people make their living in agriculture. On the governance side, they've spelt out exactly what they want the government to do. So it's not rocket science.
Yeah, it's not.
It's all there.
It's not.
And the difference between this program and previous programs is that the international community is engaged with the diplomatic community on all of these issues, and the government has committed itself to meeting these requirements. So I think if the 3 pillars program works through, I mean the reaction in Washington 2 weeks ago in the spring meetings of Mtuli's presentation of that was amazing.
So this is the debt restructuring?
Debt restructuring.
So with Adesina and Chisana?
Yes.
That's on track?
It's on track. Amazing. I mean, I can't believe how much progress they've made.
Okay, all right. Then the other thing is farmer compensation.
Right.
So we've got this new
deal
where they're going to be issued with treasury bills.
That's right.
Are the farmers going to accept this?
It's a fight, eh?
Yeah.
And what's interesting about, because in the first when it was put to a referendum 2 years ago, I think 94% of the farmers accepted the 3.5 billion as compensation. And then since that time, government failed to meet their obligations. So they've had to renegotiate the whole thing, which has now been completed. Mtuli's done it.
So I've applied my mind to this 3.5 billion, and I'm not going to get into whether they're entitled to it or not. Let's just assume that they are. I believe that the current occupiers of the land, whether they have an offer letter or title deeds,
should pay for it.
They're benefiting, right? Because if they grow tobacco or whatever it is and they have a fantastic season and they make a bunch of money, they're not going to write me a check and say, well, you're a Zimbabwean and I got this big, as part of a national policy, so you should benefit in some way. They're going to benefit in their own right. So why aren't the liabilities for improvements for their account solely?
Yeah, so let's deal with this first thing. First thing is whether they're going to accept the revised deal.
Yes.
I think they will. All right?
Oh, you think the farmers will?
I think the farmers will accept it, but I think it's been a fight. There's a lot of dispute. And the unfortunate thing about it is the South African farmers have become involved. And they've been trying because they're trying to persuade the Zimbabwe farmers not to accept the deal. Okay. Because it has implications for South African farmers who are facing the same conundrum. Okay. And they want full legal compensation. Okay. And, the South Africans, the next governor of South Africa might be EFF, ANC. This is not theory. Okay. Then on the next question is, what about the future? Now, what I can tell you is that the government has been totally preoccupied in the last year with the issue of the negotiable 99-year lease, which is fungible and marketable. And that is not going to see the light of day until after the election. And one of the reasons is...
Why not title deeds?
Because the government... It's a problem with the whole of Africa. You know that freehold title has been destroyed in every country in Africa except one or two. The exception to that is Rwanda.
Well, Zimbabwe was one of the unique countries. Yeah. In fact, that's why a lot of investment went into Zimbabwe, right? Correct. It was purely because...
But Kenya was the same.
Yeah.
But freehold title, Ghana was the same. Every former British colony had freehold title.
All right, 99-year leases, that's coming after the elections?
I think so. And the question of the terms of that lease, and one of the reasons is after the elections, is that Mbora Masango.
Mbora Masango.
Noziwa.
Okay. All right. That's something to chew on.
And that answers your question.
Yeah. The audience is asking about the auction.
Right.
Where are we going? I mean, we're distributing 20 million every week.
The auction's dead.
But 20 million is going to someone's pocket every week.
Yeah, but it's dead. It's got to be replaced with something else.
So I'm going to ask a different question. Why? Because the auction is clearly not an auction.
No.
Right?
And it's not working.
So why is the central bank adamant on this dishonesty, where we have this event every week that we pretend is an auction, when in actual fact everybody knows it's a managed exchange rate? Why don't we just call it what it is? Why don't we actually tell the world, you know what? For the following reasons, we don't believe in a floating exchange rate, in willing buyer, willing seller. We believe that the state should determine the exchange rate using these variables. And this is the rationale. And it's not unusual. So you've got the Chinese government, lots of governments around the world actually have a managed exchange rate.
Well, be careful about that. The yuan is not managed. They deliberately
the largest reserves in the world.
They keep the yuan undervalued. So why is Japan devalued? The yen today is 143 to 1. 6 months ago it was 109. Why has the third largest economy in the world devalued the yen? It's to maintain the competitiveness of the Japanese industry. And that is why having our own currency is critical.
But we're doing the opposite.
Yeah. And it's going to kill our... that's why at the end of
So why is something that's so obvious?
I know. At the end of the GNU, 95% of what was in our stores was imported. Today it's about 40%. But it's going to be reversed because we're dollarizing.
Okay, we need to wrap up. So the last question that I have for you is, are you going to buy the digital gold coins?
No.
Okay. There you have it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. This was definitely enlightening. We should have you more. Yeah, this was lovely. Thank you very much to Visa again. Thank you. This was fantastic. This was great. I hope that you learned as much as I did. And hopefully we'll have more and more of these discussions. This is exactly what we're trying to promote. Have yourself a wonderful evening and enjoy May Day. Cheers.
On Monday.
Mm.